So today's plan is that we're gonna spend the first half of the class finishing chapter 2, and then for the second half of the class, we'll start chapter 3. So last time we had a little bit overflow that we have to utilize some time today to finish chapter 2. Okay, all right. And also this classroom is actually a little bit cold, right? So next time you can bring a jacket. Otherwise, it's very easy to fall asleep. All right. So last time we stopped at this message event, right? So let's do a little bit review here. So we say that if a process starts by receiving message from an external party, then we can just use this start message event that is a circle and with an opaque envelope to represent that starting process. And if a process ends with sending out a message, then we can just use a bolded circle with a solid envelope inside. And then for any message events in between, we use these intermediate message events. So if it's receiving a message, then we use a double circle with solid envelope inside. If it's receiving message, then it's an opaque envelope inside. If it's throwing out a message or sending out a message, this is a solid envelope, right? And last time we did this exercise of revising the patient and doctor's office interaction based on this message events, right? So if you recall, we say that for the patient will start the process by sending out a message. So since there is no message event that says you start a process by sending out something, so for the patient, we use the old-fashioned way, right? We use a regular start event followed by an intermediate throwing out message event or sending a message event. And then for the doctor's office, because they start the process by getting a message from the patient, right? So then here we can directly use a message start event. And then the doctor's office confirm the appointment and send out the confirmation to the patient and end the process, right? So here we can end doctor's office process by having this message ending event. And then the patient will get the confirmation and that concludes the process. So that was our practice last time. So now I want you to dig out your files and find what you did for the practice 4 for the Starbucks example. So last time we did this practice 4, right? So we say that we assume that we are only interested in the activities for Starbucks, and then we did this message flow activity. So I want you to find that practice. If you cannot find it, you can also go to the Canvas. So I uploaded some solutions to our class module. You can also find it underneath the in-class practice solutions. You can find this solution for practice 4. So you can download the BPMN format, right? Because then you can open it on the bpmn.io and then you can edit from there. So I have this practice 4 open on my end, right? So you can download it, or if you can find your own file, you can open it. So now, if you have this, let's do the next practice, the practice number 6. Okay, actually number 5. So now the practice number 5, I revised some wording from your handout, so you can just look at the slides here. So let's utilize this message events, right? These message starting, intermediate message events, and message ending. So utilize these message events to find places where we can apply those message events in this practice 4 diagram, right? So this is similar to what we did last time, but we apply that to the practice 4 diagram, right? So for example, if you find any activities in the intermediate process that is like sending out a message, right? Then you can utilize the intermediate sending out message circle or representation. So now we want to revise based on the practice 4 by identifying places where you can utilize the message events. Let's look at the first activity, right? So the first activity is called receive the order. So this means that the barista is receiving a message, right, from the customer. So here, this actually can be replaced by a message inflow event, right? And also, this is the start of the process. So this regular start event and this activity of receiving the order together, they can be replaced by back first. These can be replaced by having a start message event here, and I would hit this message flow. I would click here and remove this. Okay, right. So the first step is the barista getting a message and therefore starts the process. What about the next step? Questions or comments? Yes, for the activity after the process starts, and that process should activity called because preparing an order, this activity doesn't involve a message inflow or outflow, right? So here it should be this activity should be kept independently by itself. Okay. What about next? Okay, so give the order to the customer. This is message outflow, and it's intermediate, right? So this is correct. And ask for payment. When the barista asks the customer for payment, this is also a message outflow, right? The message gets delivered to the customer. So I would just combine this with the previous message outflow for simplicity. You could also use two message outflow events, but to keep it simple, I will just add a description here. I will zoom it. So I will say, give the customer order and ask for payment because I just don't want to have two circles there. Ask for payment method. Okay, and then the customer will say, okay, this is my payment method. So here, this question, I assume this was the previous description. How would you like to pay? This should be the question asked by the barista, right? So replying back from the customer, I would assume this should be, this is my payment method. This is the payment method. Right, because this is what the customer offers to the barista. And here you're right that this is a intermediate message event and you are receiving a message. Okay, and then this is correct. Okay, record payment, that's correct. And then you give the receipt back and that ends the process. Okay, so I want to emphasize that you also keep a separate activity for recording the payment because this activity doesn't involve message inflow or outflow, right? So you would keep that. Okay, so overall, this is very good. Any other questions or comments in this chart? I think it's pretty clear that these are different scenarios of payment method, right? So it will flow well without that annotation. Yes, that makes sense to me. Yeah, but you can, if you want more details, right, you can also add it back. Okay, so that is like a review of how we utilize the message events, right? Okay, so so the next concept that we want to learn is about other types of events. So we have this start timer event. So the idea is very similar to the start message event. It's just that here we are using a clock icon to represent that a process is starting at a particular time or a particular date, right? For example, let's say it's approaching April when it is tax time, right? So then maybe 2 weeks before you start to preparing your tax filings. Or you have a birthday coming up, right? And then that triggers you to start inviting friends to plan your birthday party. So again, to use this start timer event, right? That is equivalent to a regular start. Okay, so I wouldn't say that it will be followed by activity. Let's just say that you use it when there is a particular time restriction or the process is triggered by time or date. And similarly, this we have intermediate timer event. So we use this to represent any delays in our process. For example, let's say you need time to prepare for your tax filings or your when you plan for any things. The last one, which is a very interesting event type, is called intermediate error event. So here we are using a flash sign to show error. Okay, it's like anything is wrong, and then flash, that kind of thing. And also this is an intermediate event, right? So we would put it between the beginning and ending of a process. And this event is interesting because it is a boundary event. Okay, that's a funny name. Why we call this a boundary event? This is because we put this event on the boundary of an activity. So whenever you expect some error will happen to disturb an activity, for example, you are planning a party, and if something goes wrong that will not make this planning happen, then you can put this intermediate error boundary event on the boundary of that activity. And then that shows, okay, if anything goes wrong, then we have to cancel the party. But if everything goes smoothly, then we have to wait for 2 weeks before your birthday arrives, and then that's when you hold the party. So here, because the error boundary event actually branches the process into two, right? So here you for this error branch where you have to cancel the party, you also need to close this process by having an ending event. So some of you may confuse this error boundary event with a gateway, right? Because you may say, hey, you have two scenarios here. One is to wait for 2 weeks, the other is to cancel a party. But the boundary event, this intermediate error event, is not equivalent to a gateway. This is because the error boundary event focuses on anything wrong happens that will disturb the original activity. Whereas a gateway focuses on, you know that there are several scenarios. For example, in a payment process, you know that there are 3 scenarios, right? Cash, credit card, and gift card. But the error event just represents anything that would disturb the original activity. That's why it's called error, right? So these are 2 different concepts, and so you would use it differently. And also remember, in a gateway, we after we open these different branches, let me just show you this our exercise. After you open these different branches, right, you have to close the gateway, remember? Right, so you would end up going back to the same route, right? And then you would have this only one ending to the process. Whereas when you have an error event here, you are breaking up your single process into two processes. That's why you end up having two ending events. Okay, so this is just to emphasize that the boundary, the error, intermediate error event is not equivalent to a gateway. Questions? All right, so now let's practice using these timer events and error boundary events. So we look at the practice number 6. So let's assume that based on the practice 5 that we just did, let's assume that the coffee needs time to brew. And once the barista starts preparing the order, it will take 5 minutes. But if anything goes wrong in between, let's say if a customer just walks away, in that case, that's an error, right? And then the order will be canceled. So can we utilize the timer events and also the intermediate error event to revise the process practice 5 to reflect these more, extra information? Okay, so let's see. First, because we have to wait for the order, right? So here we add this intermediate timer event. So I forgot to mention that there is no direct shape that can represent this intermediate timer because there is timer intermediate catch event and also there is a boundary event. So I think either one works because there's no exact same name as just message intermediate event, right? I don't know whether catch or throw, what catch or throw, where is it? Here. I don't know what's the difference between intermediate catch event versus, do they have an intermediate timer throw event? Let me just take a look. Timer. Oops. So they have timer start, timer intermediate catch, boundary. Yeah, so I'm not sure what catch means here, but you can just use this. And actually, I think this one looks the same as the timer boundary event here looks the same as the timer intermediate catch event. I think either one works. You just have to put it in between. Within the process, right? So here, this is correct that you are putting it after the prepare order. And you can put the annotation to say this is taking 5 minutes. And also the error boundary event is correctly used by putting down the boundary of preparing order. And make sure that you are also putting this ending event to end this error path, right, of canceling the order. So this is very good. So now let me ask the class a question, okay? So why can't we use a start timer event to replace this start message event? So why can't I use, let's say I delete this, right? Why can't I use a start timer event? So you say this doesn't show interaction between the customer and the barista. Okay, that's the third answer I got. What else? Yes. All right. So you're saying that there is no set time for an order to come in. Okay. So you said that we need the start message. So let's first see why. Okay. So the start timer event says that this is something to start a process at a particular time or date, right? So we use the example of a birthday, your tax filing, and other things. So do we know when a customer will come in? For example, do the customers always come in at 9 a.m.? That's not true, right? They come in whenever they want. So that is to say the process starts contingent on whenever the customer walks in. Actually, you are right in some way. It's just that you still cannot piggyback the process begin with this start timer because they both represent starting of a process. So that is to say this because it has one layer of circle, right? This is already a starting event. So you cannot piggyback with another start event. For example, a message start, right? For example, you cannot even find this option here because the system knows that it's conflicting. So the main reason is that this process mainly depends on the receiving of an order, which is not dependent on a particular time or date. So we can only use a start message event to trigger this process. So we cannot piggyback on a start timer, and the interaction is not a major reason either, because as we said, right, it's dependent on. Actually, that has some merit too. It's just that it's a different. Okay, so I hope that this discussion can help us better understand this timer event, and we have to move on. Okay. So actually, let's see, when will the class end? I think we have 40 minutes, right? So okay, so I will say that these contents are the things that you have to grasp for chapter 2. So we also have other representations of a process. For example, sub-process that says that you can condense some more complicated activities within this rectangle, right? For example, let's say when you are completing a quiz, right? So this activity actually contains many other activities. For example, you can go to Canvas and then you complete the questions one by one, and then you review and submit. But you can just collapse everything within a sub-process. And you can also represent a looping task, which says you repeat an activity until certain condition is met. For example, when a waitress is giving you a list of special items of the day, she stops until the customer says, hey, this is the item that I want. Okay, this is a looping task. And we also have parallel tasks or sequential tasks. So the parallel task is that, like different individuals can do the same thing at the same time, right? For example, we go to a restaurant, all of us, we can look at the menu at the same time. But when we take orders, the waitress has to take our order one by one, right? So then the parallel process is represented by having 3 vertical lines within the activity shape, whereas a sequential task is represented by adding 3 horizontal lines within the activity shape. And there are other like data objects and data store. So these are, if you're interested, you can take a further look. So that's about chapter 2. So now let's, before we start chapter 3, do we have any questions regarding the content? Okay. So for chapter 3, we are going to talk about another type of business model. So chapter 2, the BPMN diagram is a type of activity model, which is a type of business model, right? So we use the analogy of a map to describe the difference. So we say that the activity model or the business process modeling notation is more like directing you to go from one place to another, right? So let's say in the Starbucks example, we map out the process of how the customer placed an order and then pay the order and get the order. Whereas today we're going to learn about the structure model, which is more like the map of the entire area, or it gives us a more complete picture of what's going on in the business. So, so more formally defined, the structure models describe the data and information structures within the business process. And later we will see that these structure models, they serve as a blueprint for us to construct relational databases in the next chapter. And in the structure model, we can basically represent all the entities of interest. For example, customers, salespeople, or cash account, all kinds of entities or classes of interest and their relationships. For example, how many customers can one salesperson serve, or how many accounts can one customer hold. So we also care about the relationships among different classes or entities. And we can also represent the multiplicities, or that is how many instances of one entity can be associated with the other. And later we will learn about that. And in structure models, we can also identify the attributes of the entity or class, right? For example, for salespeople, we can have their IDs, how many years they have worked in this organization, what is their checking account so that we can pay them, so on and so forth. So when we study structure model, we are specifically studying this unified modeling language, or UML class diagram. So similar to the BPMN diagram, this UML class diagram is also managed by this Object Management Group, or OMG, this institution. So let's just look at what are the building blocks for UML class diagram. So we have 3 building blocks, classes, as I mentioned. It's also called entities, and associations, and multiplicities. So classes basically are just entities or things of interest. Right? So earlier I gave you some examples, but you can also list other examples that you can think of. But broadly speaking, these classes can represent resources, events, agents, or persons, or any conceptual structures. Right. So, for example, machines in the organization, buildings, cash, or salesperson, customers, so on and so forth. So basically, it's anything that we want to collect information about. So when we represent a class, so for now, we just need to focus on the one on your right-hand side, which is just a rectangle with the class name inside. For example, bank account can be a class or an entity of interest. So we can just represent it by having a rectangle with its name. For now, we just need to grasp this. But in some other scenarios, you want to include more detailed information, which includes both the attributes and operations. So the attributes are anything that describes that class. For example, in this bank account case, the attributes can be the account number and also the balances, right? If a class is dog, which I will show later, then the attributes can be their breed, their color, their height, their weight, right? If it's like a customer, as I mentioned, it can be their gender, their age, if you can get, and their account number, right? So on and so forth. And when we describe a class, you may also include the operations. So what is operation? It is basically the service that this class provides, or the functions of that class. So let's say for a bank account, right? We use it to deposit money or withdraw money. So those can be included as operations. And let's say if we are talking about dog as a class, then the operations can be, they can bark, they can sit down, they can do other things, right? Okay, so that is class, right? So class is just a representation of a group of things or people, or you can just say it is an entity, okay? And now we have to distinguish a class and from an instance. Okay, so an instance is basically an individual object of a class. So for example, let's say we have a class of dog, right? And then each individual dog would be an instance of this class dog. So let's say like there is a dog called Bobby, then this Bobby in particular is an instance of this class dog. Okay. Another example, let's say we can use, let's call our AIS section number 2 as a class, right? And then each one of us is an instance in this class. Or you can say all the Rocker students represent a class and each one of you is an instance in this class, right? So that's the difference between an instance and the class. Okay. Any questions so far? That's okay. So the next building block of this UML diagram is called association. So this is very intuitive. This basically just represents the relationships among classes or among entities. Right. So for example, we have 4 classes here: person, auto, dealers, and state. By using lines to connect different classes, we are establishing associations between them. And we can describe their association by using a short verb phrase. For example, the line between person and auto represents an ownership association. And this says a person can own a car. Or you can say a car can be owned by a person, right? And here this is saying that a car is serviced by car dealers, or car dealers, they provide service to cars. And here this one says cars are licensed in different states, right? So by putting this description on the association lines, we are giving meanings to their relationship. And now I want to call your attention that these look very similar to the BPMN diagram, right? So here they are very, very different concepts. So you may have the tendency to add arrows on the line. Please do not do that, because that will mean something else, as we will learn later. Okay, so in the UML diagram, please do not add any arrows in these relationship lines. These are just lines. And if you add any arrows, that will mean some different kind of relationship. And we'll cover that in the next class. So here, this is something that you need to pay attention to. Now, the next concept, which is the more challenging part of this chapter, is to understand multiplicities. So the multiplicities basically describe the minimum and maximum number of instances that in one class that can be associated with those in another class. So from your preview, right, you learned that there are different options for multiplicities. So the dot just means or. Okay, 2 dots means or. So here, this basically means 0 or 1. So 1 or 1, that means just 1 only, right? And 0 or more. So this asterisk means more. And if you are going to learn about programming later, you are going to see a lot of usage of this asterisk. So basically this means more. And sometimes we use the asterisk to represent anything in some other programming language. The last one is just 1 or more. Okay, so that is simple, but the difficult part is how do we interpret this association with multiplicities? Okay, so now I have a little trick that you can use. So if we are, for example, if we are looking at this multiplicity placed next to auto, we would start our description of that multiplicity by going the reversed way. That is to say, we're going to start our description by saying each person, right? Because we're looking at this one next to auto, but we are going to start the description from person, from the other side. So here the description is each person can own a minimum of 0 cars to a maximum of multiple cars. So that's how we, this is a little trick of like how you interpret those multiplicities. So using the same way, right? So when we look at the second multiplicity that's placed next to person, then we would phrase it by saying each car is owned by one, which is that there's only one person. Okay. So this is a little trick of how you interpret those multiplicities. So let's do some practice here. Are we okay with here, or you want me to repeat? So you always go the reversed way. Okay. So number one. So I'm gonna so this is 0 or more, right? How do you interpret that in like a sentence, like what we just showed? Like for example, these. I can also repeat our example earlier. You always go reverse. If you are looking at here, then you look at the other end of this relationship. What is associated with 0 or more stock exchanges? Which class is associated with 0 or more stocks? Okay, so you are saying that each stock is associated with 0 or more stock exchanges. Is that correct? Let's look at this example again, right? So when we are interpreting this 0 or more multiplicity that's placed next to auto, we would start by saying by going back to the class that associate with it. We say that each person, right? When we look at this, we say each person is associated with 0 or more cars. Or you can say each person owns a minimum of 0 or maximum of multiple auto, right? You can say 0 or more. And if you're looking at this multiplicity next to the person, you go the other way around. You say each auto is owned by one and only one person. So actually you were correct that you say each stock is associated with 0 or more stock exchanges, right? That's what you said, or that's what I heard, right? The second multiplicity placed here. So if I ask you, how would you interpret number 2, what will be your answer? Okay, so your first part of the phrase was correct. You say each stock exchange can have at least one stock, right? That's the first part. Then your second part is unnecessary because you are only looking at number 2. So why like your second phrase is not related to this, unless you are referring back to number 1 again. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so if you want to connect these two, and then you would say, did you guys get the idea of like how to interpret this, right? Let's go through the rest. What about number 3? So you are looking at this one next to stock. So you would go the other way around. You would look at the stock exchange. You would say each stock exchange will have at least one stock. Does that make sense? I don't know how to better to describe this to you, but I would just say you go the reverse way. If you have a better way to describe this, you can let me know, right? So I just say, okay, if you are looking at this, you go the other way around. You go from the bottom to here. Okay, so what about number 3 here, Jill? So one stock can have one or more stock. That's number 2. That's the number 2. And number 1 said one stock can be traded in 0 or multiple stock exchanges. So if you are looking at number 3, that's close to stock, you would start the phrase by looking at the other way, the class that is on the other end of the association. So you would say each transaction. Oh. Okay, so if we're looking at number 5, which is next to transaction, you would go from the other end, the class that's on the other end. So you would start by saying each broker. You would always start by saying each something. So here you can, when you are talking about 6, you can ignore the 0 or more placed next to the transaction. So for example, if you are looking at 6, right, you would just say each transaction. You would not include the multiplicity here. You say each transaction is associated with only one broker. Okay, let's do this practice again. I actually have something more on the on the slide that we're gonna use next time. So, okay, let's look at this. How about this zero or multiple next to auto? How do we interpret that? Yeah, so that's actually the same example that we showed earlier, right? So if you are looking at this side, you would ignore that 101 multiplicity here. You would always say each person can own zero or multiple auto. And then Alex, your turn again. Let's do this here. Like, what is this 1 or 1? So if we're interpreting this multiplicity next to the person, we would go from the other side, which is, yeah, right? So you say each auto can be owned by one person. Yeah, we have more. So let's say, okay, so let's say, do we start from each dealer or from each auto if we are looking at this? So remember, you always go from the other way. So if we're looking at this, then it means that each auto can be serviced by one or more dealers. Let's do this one more time. What about this one next to auto? Right. Each dealer can provide service to one or more cars or autos, right? Okay. So we are gonna go through this one more time next time. But let's go back to this original diagram here, because I have some question to ask you. For this number 1, right, we say that, okay, we go the other way around. So we say each stock can be traded in zero or multiple stock exchanges. Okay, that's the interpretation. But now my next question is this real in our in the stock market? Because I was puzzled by how can a stock is not traded anywhere? That is to say, why would this minimum be 0? When would that be happening? I was kind of puzzled here, right? And then, I learned my finance course back in the old days. I forgot about all these, and then I have to Google and then say, yeah, there's a type of stock that's called over-the-counter stock. That basically means it's not publicly traded, but it's traded via broker-dealer networks. So that's why it's not listed anywhere, okay? So that's why the minimum can go to 0. Okay, the next question is, can the stock be traded in multiple stock exchanges? If you look it up, right, there are some firms that can list their stocks in multiple exchanges. For example, I can't name any specific companies, but I'm just making this up, right? Let's say Tesla, they can trade their stocks in both NASDAQ and New York Exchange. So there are cases like that. So that's why the maximum can be multiple, right? So this exercise is just to make you think, yes, now we know how to interpret this, but the next question is whether it makes sense, right? Okay, now let's look at number 2. So number 2 says each stock exchange holds at least one stock. That makes sense, right? Because otherwise it cannot be called a stock exchange. It has to trade something. Okay, number 3. So this says, so number 3, let me show you what was the original multiplicity. Okay, so I covered it up. So this is actually taken from a problem set from the textbook. So originally, the number 3 was saying that each transaction can only involve one stock. Does that make sense to you? Each transaction can only involve one stock. At least that didn't make sense to me, so I revised it to be one or more. My argument is that what if you are buying like a portfolio of stocks, right? For example, you have 1,000 to invest. Let's say one share of Apple is 500 and one share of Tesla is 500. Then I can buy one share of Tesla and one share of Apple at the same time, right? I think currently you can do it on these stock trading platforms. So I didn't think that the one or one makes sense. So I replaced it with one or more. So I don't know if you have agree or disagree with me, but this is something that I want to throw out and let you think whether it makes sense. Okay. So number 4, let's see, it says one stock can be involved in 0 or more transactions. Okay, does this make sense? So let me just break this question down. First, can the stock be involved in no transaction? That is to say, can a stock never experience a trading if you never start? Like you mean your stock is there, but you never put it in the market. So in this scenario, I also look it up. So if a company authorized certain number of shares, but they only issue a subset of that authorized share, then you would have stocks that never get traded in the public. So that's why those shares will not have any transactions. So that is why there is a minimum of 0, right? For example, let's say Tesla authorized that they can issue 1,000 shares, but they only put to the market 500 shares. So they still have 500 that they haven't issued, but it's authorized. That means they may issue in the future. So those stocks are not being traded. And for like one stock can be involved in multiple transactions, that makes sense, right? Because you buy and sell for multiple rounds, so that makes sense. Number 5, one broker can have 0 or more transactions. So when would a broker have no transaction? Okay, so this is just to show you that like not only should we interpret those multiplicities, but also trying to see if that makes sense, right? And we'll continue next time.